Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now today what I wanted to talk about is one of the riskiest cars that I've ever bought in my entire life. And it was kind of hard to narrow this down, but I think I wanted to start it off with something that is a little bit more interesting that maybe people don't know about me. Because for the majority of the videos that I've posted, it's mostly about Japanese cars. But this time around it was actually with a German car. And it was a 1991 BMW 535i, also known as the E34 chassis for the BMW enthusiasts out there that know a lot about these cars. And at the time, I didn't really think too much of it, but the car grew on me so much and I invested so much time in trying to really put it back together that it was really sad when I had to get rid of it. And I'm hoping that one day that I actually can find one in really good condition. But unfortunately, to find one in good condition, especially with a manual transmission, it's your chances are pretty much slim to none, unless you want to pay an arm and a leg, given how the used car economy is right now. But yeah, just wanted to do like a quick overview, a little bit of a storytelling, as you will. So if you don't really like these kind of videos, don't want to waste your time, so maybe this is your time to click off. You can watch something else. But for everybody else that's sticking around, let me give you the quick spiel. So I ended up buying this car for $500. Super crazy cheap. But if I was to say that this was an easy car to put back together, that would definitely be me not telling the truth. Because when I bought this car, what actually happened is I think somebody on the undercarriage, they bottomed out the car so bad that they put a giant hole in the oil pan. So it didn't matter how much oil you put in the car, it would just come spewing out the bottom. And it was this huge ordeal just to get the car, and when I bought it, I couldn't start the car. That was a huge thing. I was basically buying this car, a 30-year-old BMW, that I can't even start. I don't know how the engine sounds, and it had a ton of miles. It had like 230,000 miles on it. So I don't know if the transmission is bad, the engine's bad. I'm pretty much just rolling the dice at this point. So what ended up happening is I just took the risk, and I was like, you know what, 500 bucks, even if I have to, take it to the crusher, I'll take the hit on that. But I was really intrigued just to see what I can do to kind of put this thing back together. And of course, with older BMWs, especially the E30s and the E34s, you will know about all the little electrical gremlins. The lights on the dashboard sometimes don't work. The power windows have a mind of their own. Sometimes you can't even open the trunk because it's all electrically powered. And I don't know if you want to call that the quirkiness of it, or just like the way that it's basically what you're buying into, but that's just kind of the gist of it, that's what you're kind of buying into. So when I got this, I eventually came to a point where I needed to do something about the oil pan. That was the first thing. It was just, it kept me up at night because I wasn't able to just start the car and listen to it run. So came to this point where we pulled it back into the shop, and we bring the engine up into the air, and we're looking down at it, and it almost looks like somebody took a shotgun to the oil pan, and there was so much oil spewing out every time that we would be pouring stuff into it. So it was really difficult to do, and I specifically remember that there's a cross member that goes along the bottom of the entire chassis that gets in the way of you being able to basically slide the oil pan out. So what we had to do is lift the engine up just a little bit so that you're able to basically undo the bolts, drop the oil pan, and slide it back down. So once we got to that point, it became really clear that if we were going to replace this, it was probably going to cost a lot of money, and it's kind of hard to actually find those old E34 oil pans in good condition. So what we ended up doing is just really wiping it down super clean, using JB Weld, which is hilarious because a lot of people think, oh, you use that for like a little patch job. You're never supposed to do that with an oil pan. But we did it to the point where I spent days, and then just a little bit at a time, I just put a little bit of JB Weld, let it sit, cure for a day. A little bit more JB Weld, let it sit, cure for a day. Eventually put it back onto the car, and so crazy, just listening to it just fire right up, and the car, so smooth, so easy to drive. And I remember just taking it around the block for the first time was like one of the most satisfying things that I've ever done. So now the big obstacle next was the stereo, because this car had one of the worst stereos ever. Because it's BMW, of course. They can't make it, you know, super simple where you can just take an aftermarket radio and you stick it in and you're all good, because in every single speaker individually there is a what do they call it? It's every speaker has its own amplifier. So when you put an aftermarket stereo in, the speakers don't work. So what I had to do is rewire everything from the beginning to the end of all the wiring that goes to the stereo. It was a huge nightmare. I had to figure out which wire does what. You have to sit there, you test which one's ground, which one's power, what does this do, what does this not do. And I replaced all the speakers in it, and the stereo sounded awesome. I remember I put on Pink Floyd. That was like one of the first songs I put on it. I think it was like Time by Pink Floyd. And I remember just having the windows down, even though one of them wouldn't roll down at the time, and I was just cruising along, and I just had the biggest grin on my face. And I absolutely loved the car. But it came to a time where I was like, you know what, I'm kind of pushing my luck here, and I always felt kind of nervous starting this car just for whatever reason. You know, it's a 30-year-old BMW. I don't want to be, you know, turning it into a money pit. I don't want to be throwing so much money that, you know, I'm just gonna, you know, it's just gonna be an endless money pit. I don't want that to be. So what I ended up doing is I put it up for sale, and this guy came up and he was interested in coming to take a look at the car. But what ended up happening is he wanted to do a trade. And at the time, I was very skeptical. I did not want to do any sort of trade with anybody. That was like the last thing that I wanted to do. And I kept telling the guy no. But he was very persistent. He's like, please, come on, the car is super clean. You should come check it out. And it was like a 91 Lexus LS400. And for those people that don't know, those are executive little LS400s from the early 90s. Very stout, super reliable cars. I mean, we're both talking about executive luxury cars here. I mean, of course, they both eat gas like sin, but in return, you get a very smooth ride. And I remember when he brought it over, I wasn't really into the looks. I wasn't really in love with it, but he was willing to offer money on top, and he gives me the car. So I got to a point where I decided to let it go. And even to this day, I still kind of think about that car sometimes, and I'm like, man, should I have really got rid of that thing or what? But you know, that's the thing that you kind of have to come to terms with, especially if you're going to be doing this car stuff for a long time, is you'll come and go with the cars, and sometimes you always think like, oh man, was this the one that I kind of let go too soon, or the one that got away, or the one that I should have kept? Because now if I held on to that car and, you know, maybe put a little bit more time and effort and stuff like that, you know, it could be going to this day. I don't know, because even the 3.5 liters, those are known as like the big six back in the early 90s, and those are the ones that are known for being like super reliable. I mean, that engine, once it turned over, it was so smooth. I was really scared. I thought it was going to be super crunchy, but it was the complete opposite of that. So I'm just super grateful that I got to have that experience. And even going way back when, my dad used to have an E30. He had the 325i, and that was the one that had kind of like the big stroker engine, so it was super torquey with the manual transmission. And I think on my bucket list, I definitely want to find one of those E30s. But of course, they're considered a cult classic, you know, by all BMW enthusiasts. So it's super hard to find like one in good shape that hasn't been either beaten to the ground, turned into a drift car, or somebody is literally asking for a kidney for it. So I think with that all being said, I'm gonna end that here. Just a little bit of story time for you guys. So I'll let you guys go. So take care. Have a great day.